Michelle, you may have to start.
Yes.
Okay. Hi. Welcome everyone to a work session of the Kent School Board. It is now 5:30 p.m. and I will turn the meeting over to Dr. Calvin Watts.
Thank you, Vice President Bettinger, members of the board, staff, team. Thank you, Ms. Halley. I want to first of all thank some incredible leaders, certainly from our communications team and our equity council, who have worked hard and smart to help us dive even deeper into our critical work of addressing individual needs of our students, staff, and families when they need it. And as we know, that work is not for the faint of heart. It's certainly not easy work, and it is worth it. So with that, we're going to have an opportunity for our communications lead, Melissa Laramie, and team members to support the work, to review our board communications plan, as well as our equity council policy 1801 and 1801P, the procedure. Ms. Laramie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Watts. Good evening, Vice President Bettinger, members of the board, Dr. Watts, Ms. Halley. It's wonderful to be with you this evening. And we do have two agenda items this evening. And with your permission, we'll go ahead and move forward with the board communications plan. We do have a few members of the Equity Council who are planning to join us either right around 6:30 p.m. pending how quickly we're able to proceed through the communications plan discussion. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. And you should be seeing the PowerPoint screen now. Okay. So again, thank you for this discussion that we've had on the docket for a while, and I'm glad to come back and facilitate this discussion about your strategic communications plan. This evening, what I am really looking forward to discussing as the core of my work and my calling, there are many approaches to communications planning, and strategic planning is definitely one of them. This evening, I will share our district's approach, review briefly our current district strategic communications plan, our previous board communications plan to support your discussion this evening of the next steps you would like to take to update your communication plan for the board in alignment with your board goals. So specifically for us in Kent School District for the last 3+ years, our approach for our team has been a strategic communications plan approach. We really take a look at several key components when approaching any type of communications plan, whether it's district-wide, collaboratively with teams, internally, or communities. We strive to empower teams that we work with at the school building level, at the community-wide level, or with teams within our communities to learn to do this on their own and together with us as the communication and public affairs teams in all communication and planning needs, whether it's for a single event or a year-long project that we're initiating. But to really go through the steps of identifying their audience, determining goals and objectives, knowing their key messages, and being clear about their tactical plan. And these are just a few of the key questions that you see on the screen here that we ask every time we're developing a communications plan. Last month at the March 16th work session, we shared our 2020-22 district strategic communications plan. In our work, we recently shifted just this last year to a 2-year plan. And we talked in depth about what this looked like and how we walked through an extensive SWOT analysis, how we simplified our communications plan to focus on 2 primary objectives and 7 strategies, outlining our key tactics to help us meet our objectives over the next 2 years. I talked a little bit and shared with you about our district approved tools and how we use them to provide timely information to internal and external audiences in as many languages as possible, and where we want to go with our communications as we continue to work on delivering accurate and timely information. We do take our work seriously to support and monitor all communications, whether it's crisis communications, event planning, event information, or important information throughout this pandemic that we've been tasked with sharing. And we talked a little bit about all the methods and channels that we have, from our website and social media, email, phone calls, texting, e-newsletters, our face-to-face meetings, and our community partnerships, and how all of that flows through our office. And the importance of feedback, looking at our analytics, reviewing those frequently, prioritizing professional learning, and improving our strategies as we continue to deliver communication. And so happy to continue to support, honored to support your work in delivering a board communications plan. When we first did this together between the school board and the communications office in 2018-19, it was the first time that the school board had an extensive plan of its own, separate from the district communications plan. We developed the plan in 2018-19. It was aligned at that time to the board's goals specifically, and also aligned to the strategic plan for the district's strategic communications plan. Over the course of developing the plan, and then throughout that year, we held multiple meetings, work sessions, where we discussed the plan, we made revisions to the plan, and then we had updates at regular board meetings about how things were going, what things were happening in alignment to fulfill that plan. And within the plan itself, each board member had specific contributions, time commitments, time-bound actions that needed to be taken, deliverables each month. And of course, at the end of that first year, there were discussions about the board's communication plan needing to be revised and changed as we had new members coming on board. And so within that plan, as you've seen and reviewed, there were 4 main components to the 2018-19 plan that, again, at the time aligned and were very similar to the district's strategic plan of that year: audiences, strategies, methods, and our assessment and accountability. And so the board was very active in aligning and deciding on what that would look like for the board and what that meant. In 2019-20, we did not move forward, but many components with a revised communications plan or implementing a new plan, but many components like the board newsletter continued and were revised and updated as needed. And then moving into this year, after board goals were adopted, that moves us to this evening where we are tonight, which is the 2021 school board goals. Goal 2, which is to review and update the 18-19 communication plan. And that leads us to our discussion this evening. And so I want to be a good facilitator and take really good notes and open the floor and discussion to you. After reviewing the 18-19 communications plan and our current 2022 strategic communications plan, what are the specific updates that you would like to make to update your communications plan? And I'll pause there and stop sharing my screen.
I guess my first question is, so I'm looking at the BSGT communication goals from the 1819 plan. So develop and implement an effective process to respond to questions, concerns, comments, or feedback from citizens. So was that accomplished?
Yes, so we do have a page on the website where we currently post questions and answers. It has shifted a couple times as we've shifted our web pages over since 1819. The website has changed, but we do have a page. How and who responds has not been clearly defined since that plan. But I would say that that is something that wasn't fully fleshed out, but that is something that we could. So that we do strive. So we do have a couple that are live on there.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so that's something that we could easily just adopt and then decide who and how responds.
Yes.
And then the next one was inform the public of the board's roles and responsibilities. I feel like that's on the website, right? And so
yeah, we did update that a little bit more, and also several board directors participated in making videos to help inform the board, inform the public, excuse me, about the role of board directors.
Great. And then communicate proactively to disseminate information that addresses issues throughout the systems and community.
Yeah, that was language that was borrowed from our district communications plan. And I think that's really helping be a key communicator. So when there's information, I think that is why the board often receives the same information that the district staff receive, so that you have accurate and timely information that you can also respond to constituents when you get emails or be asked questions about what's going on in the district.
Okay. Communicate district performance to the public in clear and understandable ways. So I feel like we get reports. So one thing, okay. So that's like our presentations that we get at board meetings. Is that what that was?
Yeah, so I think that one spoke a little bit about, so we've done several sessions around how to read and understand things such as our report card or data dashboards. And so to understand, or like levy informational sessions and different, those would be examples of what that could be speaking to.
Okay. Seek community and staff input in its decision-making to gain community and staff support. How was that implemented?
Yeah, that was a really big one. And I know Director Venkatasalam was very involved in this one, but that year we did a lot of community listening sessions. And so we had, I want to say 4 board community sessions that year, at least, where board directors went out. It could have been more than that, though, but we had community board listening sessions where staff were not present.
Right. I think, yeah, I'm looking further in the plan because I looked on online too. I think there was supposed to be, there were 3 in October 11th, 2 on the 11th and 1 on the 13th. Then there were supposed to be some on January 24th, 2 on 24th, 2019, January 26th, 2019, February 28th, 2 on that day, March 2, May 9, May 11th, but none of those, it seems, happened. So, but that's what that was, those community conversations. Is that was that bullet point? And then carefully consider community and staff input in decision making. How was that implemented? Because I'm trying to not reinvent the wheel if we can, just go from the 2018-19 plan.
And I appreciate that. Just to be clear, is there, what was the question that you were asking?
I'm just looking at the BSGT communication goals, and I'm just trying to understand how they were implemented, just so as we go forward, instead of reinventing the wheel, we can look at these and see if they were viable options, if they worked.
I do need to pull those up. I don't know where exactly our communication plan is, unfortunately. But in terms of what the end result was, we did have those community conversations, and a lot of the discussions also revolved around having that thought exchange. That was the genesis of the thought exchange process, because we wanted to know in advance what are the concerns the public is bringing to our attention at these community conversations. And so I would say that thought exchange came after, but during our community conversations, we had very low attendance. That was one of the biggest concerns we had, is that there was quite a bit of time on the part of the district that was put into place. And we had a lot of flexibility in terms of hours and dates and times, and but we had so few people who attend, and it was the same people who attended several of the consecutive ones as well. So I think we needed to kind of rethink about those community conversations. And it also was not a participation of the full board. And that was part of the reasoning behind that was, of course, to ensure that the board was speaking without staff members present. But it got to a point where there were a lot of questions that board members didn't have all the answers to. And we did talk about having the entire board be present with staff members and answer in a sort of a town hall type situation. So that was the last discussion we had before we stopped the community conversations.
And then there were town halls. There were like 4 town halls in November, I think, of 2018. Because I went to one at least.
Yes, that was the district's communication, community conversations. Yes, we did have that as well.
Okay. Okay. So
I'm just anxious. I'm a little unclear tonight. Forgive me, and I need a little clarity, but it's been a long time since we really looked at this communication plan. And going forward, I personally would like to put a lot of emphasis on what we're going to do going forward. And I was involved in a lot of the meetings with the board and stuff, and saw that for myself personally and all the stuff that went on. So, I mean, I do think it's really important, even though the attendance seemed to be low at those. And I think I went to 3 of them or something. And one, I think it was only another person in the room out at Kent Lake with me. And that's too bad, because that's a real chance to get to know people one-on-one. And I like that kind of thing, just like I like to be with the kids. And I even though it was not maybe very well attended, I like to try to do something like that again, to interact with the community. It's been so long, because we really didn't do much of that last year because of the pandemic. And I'd also like to find some sessions, to the thing that I enjoy so much is talking to young people and having the board talk to young people. And one of the more successful community connections was at a library. And there was quite a few people in that room out in Renton, the Fairwood Library. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of people, young people there, and a lot of communication on that particular one. So, I mean, I think that people as a whole, it's just my opinion, but people want to get more involved and they want to step up and hear. And even if we find it to be a waste of time or not very well participated, I'm perfectly willing to volunteer. And I'm in a very good and I know privileged position because I'm retired. And so I have more flexibility with my time, even though I'm probably a pretty busy retired person, actually. But I would like to see us have more, get out with our community, get out with our kids, talk. I learned so much. I mean, it's just a whole different atmosphere that I learned from by being out, but it can't be on Zoom. I don't want to do any more of these Zoom things. I've been Zoomed to death. So that's just what I'm kind of looking forward to today. So thank you.
Can I ask clarifying statement? I noticed in the documents that there's the 2018, 2019 plan that you're asking us to look at. And then, but there's also this communications plan for 2020, 2022. That's, I'm assuming, the district communication plan, I'm assuming, right? And so that the 2018-19 is just for the board communication. So I guess my clarifying question is, are you wanting us to look at this document and make some suggestions for what we want to keep or get rid of? I think I need some like sentence stems, or I need some like very clear, like, what are you looking for to help? Because I mean, I can go through this and put my teacher hat on and say, no, this, yes, this, but like, I kind of want to know what exactly you're looking for.
Yes, thank you, Director Benno. The ask from the board for the board goal was to continue with a separate board communication plan. So the ask for the goal for tonight was just that. You're absolutely right, to update the 2018-19 board communication plan. What changes, recommendations do you have? What do you want to make changes to in the 2018-19 board communications plan? I provided the district communications plan as a reference. So where is it and how are we communicating as a district? Because in some ways, I think it should be similar. We shouldn't be doing completely different things. And listening sessions, for example, is a great example of how we are doing things differently, consistently than we were doing in 2018-19. Thought exchange also wasn't part of our work. And so I provided that more as a frame of reference than a directive, as I don't want to be necessarily directing the board's communication plan. This is, I can be a partner in helping the work, but this is the board communications plan.
Awesome. So I guess to kind of follow up then with that, looking at the list like of methods of communication, like some of them I think are relevant, like email communication, of course, and following the OPMA, and then phone conversations, of course, are relevant. I had a question about this idea of like the website. Like I feel removed from the website. In fact, like I find the website kind of challenging to navigate at times, looking for things. So I'm curious, like as far as like methods of communication, I don't see that as unless I'm not doing something right in my position. Like I don't see the website being a way that the board communicates, unless that's something the president communicates. And I am just not familiar with that because I'm too new. So I guess I kind of have a question about that. And again, I echo Director Hamada on face-to-face conversations. I'm like, even like, I know we don't have a plan yet that I know of about having board meetings in person, but I would hopefully, we're working on that. But also, if we're going to do that, having spaces for face-to-face, socially distance, meeting guidelines with community members and students. I'm going to echo always students. Going back to the classroom this week, I've realized I miss students and talking to students. So like any chance I get, like during the time that I can, like with my job, it can be challenging to like speak to students, face-to-face conversations with community members. And I see that here, but I know it's challenging with COVID, and maybe there needs to be something in here about like emergencies, you know, pandemics, etc. And then there's also this like, there was a, what did I see? Again, same thing with social media. I feel like I'm kind of removed from that. I don't do the social media. Like I don't have access to like update a district's social media. So I don't know if that's necessarily relevant in this plan because it's not something that is part of my day-to-day duties or my duties as a board director, unless again, there's something I'm missing. And then the board e-newsletter, I'm new. I literally don't know what that is. I do not know what that board newsletter is. And like, it looks like there's some great content in it. Again, I'm new, so I may not see it. I may not participate in it. I may not get it yet. But those are and of course, video and live stream, I'm a fan. Let's keep doing it. But that's what I first look at, like these methods. That's why I think of like, what is it that board directors are actually going to be doing? And like, what is like my responsibility and what do you want us to do? So that's off the top of my head as I look at that is what I come up with. And if anybody has any feedback or questions about that or agrees, that'd be awesome.
I agree, face-to-face. I agree, community conversations. I agree, students. I vividly remember going to some conversation, town hall, something at Kent Ridge, and a bunch of students showed up because they just happened to have a club after school. And their principal said, oh, there's going to be a community conversation in the library. And so they all stayed later, or they probably went to Jack in the Box down the hill and have dinner, and then they came back. So yes, I've gone to Kent Lake before and met with a bunch of students, the band kids. I remember before I was a board director. So I agree. Director Hamada mentioned the Fairwood Library. That one, there was about 40 or 50 people there. It was at like 10 a.m. on a Saturday. And so that seemed to be a really good time, actually. So I think that is, I agree. Talking to families, I think I mentioned this in my board update too. I'm just set up until I can be in person with people. I've just personally set up a Teams meeting with constituents, a standing final last Monday of the month. Anyone who wants to, just join and talk. I thought it was helpful. Director Vengdasalam said about thought exchange. So that would be helpful if before a meeting, if we did these community conversations again, which I'm an advocate of, before the meeting, if a couple weeks before the meeting, people could submit any questions. So we were somewhat prepared with answers or somewhat prepared with information, that would be super helpful. The newsletter I liked, and I just think with COVID, what happened with that was just too many things going on, but I did like that a lot. And mostly I think it's I'll echo what I've heard a lot of people say. It's about relationships. It's about talking to people. And when we have these community conversations too, if they're in the evening, having childcare available maybe, or having food or something like that might be a way to welcome people more and make them feel more welcome to bring their kids. So
yeah, I think we have to kind of think about the time frame when this all happened, and it was in a difficult financial time, and so there are things we can imagine, reimagine, that could be much better, welcoming environment for our constituents, and also. I think, before the finance questions kind of prevailed, and now there's so many other issues, back to school, it could really inform how we deliver services down the road. So I see that as a huge plus as well. One thing I do want to say about this communication plan, it demanded a lot of our time. And so this is a clear commitment in time. Doing the newsletter, I did that for about 1.5 years as president. And that is a huge task to take on, because you have to be on top of everybody, get everybody to submit information and time, and then send it on to Melissa. So I just caution, we can embrace a lot of this, but whoever is doing this or is the president will have to lead it. And we'll have to take on quite a bit of this. And also the commitment, the evenings and Saturdays. I agree, the Saturdays were much better attended, or the evenings, but Saturdays were well attended in the library. So the commitment part is huge for board directors, if we're going to adopt something like this.
Well, and I think too, and I've seen this before, is we have done some of this, but I think going to people for where they're at and perhaps concentrating on their issues that would come up, which could be everybody's issues, but just going in and saying to certain communities and being prepared with interpreters or whatever we have to have would be extremely helpful. And I know, because I've tried to get a lot of people to meetings before as an advocate, and I have to call and call and call, and people promise they're coming. And then, I mean, it's a major task to get people out. But when they do come out and you can get 50 people in a room, they are very beneficial one-on-one. It just takes a lot of work. And again, I'm committed to these issues. I'm committed to equity issues and having everybody have a voice. And those that don't necessarily have a voice, we want them all to have a voice. So however we do that, I'm workable to whatever everybody else wants to do. So
I agree with that, Director Hamada. I also think that if we look at some of our marginalized communities, like school has never been a place for them. So they're not going to want to come to a school. They're not going to want to come to a district event. So we have to think creatively about how we're going to go to them or how we're going to make it a safe environment so that they are willing to come and participate in the events. A lot of the students, my former students I talked to, like the common thing is just like, school's awful. Like, I didn't feel welcome. People were racist. People were homophobic, et cetera, et cetera. So why would I want to go back to a building like that I didn't like or enjoy? And so thinking about it from that perspective, it's just like, what are we going to do? The topics have to be relevant. They have to be something that the community wants to come and talk about. And they don't want just gloom and doom and drama. They want to know, they want to participate in conversations that'll move the district forward. And I think the work that we're doing is very important. And I think that's work that people are invested in. So we have to communicate it out and we have to go to where people are, whether it's the libraries or whatever. I love that idea, but going to community centers, libraries, or spaces that people are in are the places to go. Like doing it at the district office, doing it at a school, even though we own it and it's convenient, it's not going to be necessarily what everyone wants to do. We need to go to them and however that looks like. And so that we should keep that into consideration as we talk about like our plan for messaging, because some of the tools that we may offer may not be accessible necessarily to everyone. And as I was looking at the district communication plan, I was like, oh my gosh, there's so much. And that's not necessarily bad because then you pick something and you'll probably find it on there. But I was almost a little overwhelmed by the amount of different things, but we want people to have access as well. So I guess it's just kind of a line of like, how do we get to where people are at? I think that's huge, just understanding that we want to make sure that the community always feels welcome. And so we have to continuously let them know that they're welcome. And also I agree with like language supports. I don't know how you do live translation or whatever, but regardless of what that looks like, we have to make it accessible to families as well in whatever way we can.
So I will say, thank you, Director Benno. I think those are really important points. And I just want to give some recognition for Karen Howie. The amount of work, and to Melissa, of course, in the amount of work to organize these things and to be really thoughtful about where it happens. And a lot of these libraries, those were all very thoughtful results of, these kind of concerns about geographic proximity to their children's schools. And so doing it at the Fairwood Library, the Kent Library, and the Covington Library were the three main areas. But it's interestingly enough, I thought the students came more to the school meetings than the libraries. So we do have those kinds of, what shall I say, not conundrum, but issues, I guess, that we have to address. And then there were issues in Covington that if we set up a meeting on Tuesdays in Covington, then we were not listening to the Covington City Council members who were meeting that night. And so then we had to do all the switcheroos again. And so it gets really complicated, if we're considering everybody's meetings. And but I just want to give, a shout out to staff members who did all of that work, because it was a lot. It really was. And we'll find that we're going to have the same issues, but we just need to be more flexible and think about that, the restrictions others have with their time as well. But I'm all good with all of this, it's just somebody has to do all this work. So I'm hoping, that's the case with our board.
And I'm wondering too, if, when you're talking about the workload and trying to minimize that, I'm wondering if, and this could be way off the wall, but I'm wondering if maybe we connected with organizations and different organizations, whether they be cultural or whatever, or service oriented or whatever they are, nonprofits, if we couldn't put some of the burden on getting it together and placement, and then we'd show up, say whoever's some group that we want to discuss, or I think a lot of groups are anxious to talk to us, and they might be willing. I mean, I know groups that would be willing to, furnish refreshments and stuff like that, or whatever it is that their culture likes to have with it, and highlight that the board and the superintendent, a couple of board members, or all the board or whatever, are going to be there. Bring your questions, and have it more of a community gathering, that's just my thoughts. So.
Yeah, and I know Kent Community Foundation has said that you have 600 some partners, can we organize that? And I don't know how everybody feels, but they're open to doing something like that. We should also carefully consider how do we reach, this district of our size, so that, everybody's hearing the same message. And I think that is also problematic in that, we talked about this, and Dr. Watson team had those meetings at the schools for the financial updates. And if you could make it, you could make it, if not, so. And a lot of these are not recorded because people don't want to always be in front of the camera, and board members want to have some privacy. So how do you balance all of that? I'm all for community meetings, and we had those, and then those were really successful, I thought. But there's follow-up too. It's not just having a community conversation. Then we have to come back and write up the notes to Dr. Watson team. Then that information has to be answered on our website. That's how we proceeded. And so the answers, everybody was seeing the same response. So that also takes time. So it's not just us attending the meeting, but we have to gather all that information and take it back to the district. And then the staff will have to respond to that, and they would get posted on the website. That's how that worked.
Can I ask another question about the document under social media? There's a list of do's and don'ts and tips. Again, I question why that's there, since we don't have unless I'm supposed to, and I don't know this, have a district social media account. Am I supposed to have a Kent board Twitter account? I'm supposed to be tweeting. This makes it sound like that or is this my personal stuff? I'm kind of curious, because it makes it sound like it says something in here logging into your website and social media, and I was like, but again, I don't have, it says connect your site to the official district website and social media outlets. I don't necessarily know what that means unless I have web access or a district social media account. So I guess I just need clarifications on those social media tips. If this is going to be the policy we're revising and looking at, I don't understand how that kind of relates to the work that we're doing. So if you can answer that or help me with that.
Absolutely, I'm happy to. So this came out of the reason why we included this is because we want to help our board protect themselves and each other in the district. Our legal counsel had addressed this in one of our OPMA trainings that we do annually with the board about the importance of social media and where OPMA is crossed and how you are always a district representative, and then specifically where to engage, how you engage with the public as a board representative. So we put together tips within this specifically about how you are engaging as a board director on social media. So this is about your director accounts. And some people have separate accounts and some people have no accounts. And then this was also to help address questions that were coming up about at the time about engaging in closed discussion groups and other social media outlets. So that was the intention of including this, as we do have social media policy. This was just, this is not policy, this is our communications plan, just to support engaging in social media, because we're not saying it's don't use social media. This is just how we can safely engage with community through social media platforms. Tips.
So if I had a social media account, if I do, I don't, but if I do, then I should follow these guidelines, like,
Yes.
you know, Joe for rah Kent or whatever, like, and I posted things like you would want me to follow these guidelines. Okay, that makes sense.
These are helpful tips to follow. And if you have any questions, myself and my team are here to support always. If any of this is not clear, as well as you could consult legal counsel, board legal counsel. But between this and our policy, you would be covered. Which is covered under acceptable use policy. And forgive me for not knowing the number.
That makes sense, but I guess my confusion is there's a thing that says connect your site to the official website. I thought we were not supposed to do that. So I guess I needed clarification on that too.
If it's a board, so if it's a district, if it's your district account, so if it's I'm Joe Rara, board member, I think that's what you said, then you could connect that account to the district account. But if it's Joe personal account, you would not connect Joe personal account to the district site.
Okay.
So I think I need clarification too. I'm sorry, I've never really noticed that part until now. So I think Joe Rara might be a campaign page, you know, for board members. So we're already a board member, but it started as a campaign page. So do we need to connect that to? What does that mean?
You don't have to.
Connect?
It's just a way to promote what's going on. I'll use my own personal real life Twitter as an example. My personal Twitter is not connected to, but I do retweet things that I believe in as an individual person, but I am not identified as my job or I don't list the district website as, because I use it for my personal beliefs and it states that in my personal bio.
Yeah.
But I do occasionally retweet things because I think it's important, and I have other educational people and people in the community that I think need to know about the free meals or other services or just really things that I have core beliefs in. But I do
so
not.
We can say tweets are my own or something on there.
Yeah, but everything I do and tweet and say on social media is available to. Because it's an open file, is open to the public, and is open to OPMA, or not OPMA, PP, public records. Get my acronyms right.
Okay, so we just have to keep it open, basically. Yeah.
And as far as the website goes, Director Benna, you've brought that up. So the board does have several pages. That's where we posted your wonderful welcome and celebration, your photo. We have videos that we'd like to do to welcome. But the board, those are your pages. And so if there's other information, we did have, for example, the video about what it means to be a board member, the role of the board director that we did the videos on with past board members. Those pages are the boards, and as the content experts, which is how we define it in communications, if there are other things that we want to add to that, it is not that you're technically responsible as the board to add those, make those changes or add that information, but you would work with us as partners to make changes or additions to the board's web pages. So we're at 6:15, and I want to be mindful. It sounds like there might be some additional time needed to go through and make some recommendations. As far as location, this I can add this as a Word document. Well, I want to be mindful of OPMA. I will make sure that you can send me track changes in a way that does not violate OPMA, and send me your changes, and I will collect those using the board's team site. And I'll make sure that's in my follow-up in the weekly update with clear directions on how to do that, so that we can get that information and then compile it together, much like we've done with policy work or similar to that, so that we can start gathering those changes and input, and start also talking about timeline, and how long is this communications plan? Are we with just a handful or so of board meetings left with this school year? Are we looking at developing a plan for next year, a yearly plan to update? Have you input on that?
That's what I was thinking that actually at the start of this meeting. So
Okay.
great minds think alike. So yeah, I think it's probably going to be something that we would start in August, and moving forward,
Okay.
and maybe try and do so you said the district is a 2-year plan, so maybe try and mirror that. And then just relook at it maybe midway through. Sounds agreeable to me. And something that struck me too as we're talking, because there's so many different, I know that Director Hamada especially likes to go to events at the schools once the schools are open, and especially if this plan is starting in August. Something to consider too would be, I know a lot of places they just share their calendar, so so then if I'm going to the Fairwood PTA's science night, then I'd put that on my calendar that I'm going to do that, so it could just be easily tracked. And if another board director was like, oh, I'd like to go to that too, or I'm free, then they would just be able to, then at that point the onus would be on the board to say to Naomi, hey, it looks like we might have a quorum of the board at Fairwood Elementary science night or whatever. But then just being able to see some of these community things, I think that's another thing that I personally, once schools are open and, probably in the fall, in the 21-22 school year, because that's something too, I think is good to just get out there. And that's another way to build relationships, is to go to as many of these as is reasonable. And so just that's something I just want to just plant a little seed that might be something that we might be willing to just share our calendars, so that we can just see what's going on, what's on the horizon.
And point of clarification here, do we have to formalize this by bringing this to the board as an agenda item when we finalize it, or is it just kind of flow into it? Can somebody help me to understand that, how that works?
Director Hamada, it was not formally adopted in a regular board meeting previously. It is board's work, so I don't know that it would be. A communications plan, as you know, is a living document that generally is updated and reviewed often. So if you were to make it a formal thing that is adopted, as we make revisions, I would assume it would need to come back again and again, but that would be up to the discretion of the board as far as any formal action.
Well, I mean, we did the board calendar. Denise and I sat down and did it, and then we went over it as a group. But we did bring that up in an agenda, and it's a fluid document too. Did we not approve that? Correct me, my memory may be, I don't know. Did we not bring that to the board?
So I think the update would be in your board goals, because this is board goal number 2.
Okay.
As far as progress, but I would defer to maybe Director Venkatachalam.
Yeah, I think we didn't adopt, I thought we did, but we didn't. What I remember is that we had 4 meetings, communications meeting. We built it into our school board meetings to make sure that we had updates and had a discussion on the progress. So yes, we didn't take action on the plan itself, but we had regular updates on what is changed, what's added, so forth. And that was built into our calendar. So that was 4 times a year.
Oh.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say my last piece of feedback is if we're going to put anything with dates in a plan, we have to figure out what, like, if it's going to be a 2-year plan, then we have to put dates up to 2 years. So that's another piece of feedback for us. If we're going to do this yearly and we're going to put actual dates in it, then we probably need to revisit early. I don't know if we can plan 2 years in advance. Right. So that's just something to think about. But I also want to echo, like, I keep telling people, invite me to everything. Like, I want to know what the schools are doing. That's probably gonna be a giant master calendar, but like, I don't know what kind of access or what that looks like, or where we find that, or how we divvy those things up so we're not all showing up and breaking laws or whatever. But like I don't know. I want to know how we can. I in my reports, I always tell you, invite me. But I don't know where like a master calendar is or something that we can all see it. I think that's a great idea to be able to do that. So that's something, I don't know, needs to be part of the plan or just saying it out loud and it'll happen. I don't know, but I think that's something like that should be stated, at least, that we want to try to attend events in the schools as well.
Is there a master calendar where every school, so in a normal non-COVID year, so you would know that here's all the band concerts, here's all the plays for the whole district, here's all the science nights.
Well, we continue to work towards that goal, I will say.
So I'll add that in the newsletter, we had at the bottom of the page, all the upcoming opportunities as we knew it. And then, of course, Dr. Watts has under the weekly reports, all the upcoming things as well. So there are a couple of places we could put as much as but we're not going to know what every school is doing. I appreciated Chief Vella's reports that show what our schools are doing. And so on a similar front, maybe, it would be helpful to hear some upcoming celebrations, events, etc., in that part of that newsletter. Or
that's something we can certainly continue. But the reality is there, and the beauty is that we have a richly diverse school district with so many opportunities for celebrations that it would literally be a challenge to list each and every one. And so what we've typically done is those that are large in stature or importance, if you will, or regarding a celebration that's unique to that particular day or time or space. And we'll send out a doodle poll. That's typically how we've done that. So we'll continue to see how we can refine our strategies and make sure you can be as many places as possible within the time allowed.
So Dr. Watts, I think also, I would also engage in that conversation about having, under the previous administration, the district would coordinate, some events, some opportunities for board
Absolutely.
members to go into the classroom.
Absolutely.
And that would be, I don't remember if it was posted, but it was, we were invited, and if there were 3 people, I guess then it would get posted. So that might be another way, like set aside some time. We're going to go into the schools, and if you'd like to come, let us know, and then we tag along and
Absolutely.
hear about what's
Yes,
going on in the schools. So
absolutely.
we've talked about that, but I
Yeah.
know that's also time.
Well, no, and know that that is a focus and certainly an effort, given our current circumstances, that is not as a viable option. We're getting closer, obviously, and I do look forward to having that opportunity with our board. So stay tuned. Thank you for the reminder.
And I appreciate this conversation, particularly because as I believe it was Vice President Bettinger mentioned, that Miss Naomi Zantello is able to join us this evening and is hearing this firsthand about the calendar wishes, and it is just her first week with us, so learning to navigate the challenges and opportunities that calendar coordination brings in this role. And again, also keeping in mind, as Director Benno mentioned, the complexities that COVID continues to bring for us. And as we all have been excited these past 2 weeks here in Kent, I think the timing is similar, returning to in-person learning as in other districts like Renton and our other neighbors in surrounding areas. We have to continue to remind ourselves that the pandemic is still here. It's still very much real and present. And as eager as I know we all are to get back in person, numbers continue to rise in our community and in our county. And so the mitigation strategies that we have in place, we are all very mindful of. And so our plan moving forward, both at the district level and for the board, will continue to be flexible and adaptive for both a more normal return, which we all are longing for, and for the current situation, which we have become all very accustomed to, unfortunately. But we'll continue to live in and abide by to keep each other and ourselves safe. So I hear that very clearly the next steps are to provide a little bit more time for some thoughtful feedback that will come in the next communications and public affairs update and to the board, with some opportunities to give some direct changes to the current, to the 1819 board communications plan. And we'll continue to revisit what this could look like with a start at the fall for the 21-22 school year, to align to the timing of our current 2022 district plan. And lots of rich conversation about what to include and how we can improve it to align to the board's current communication desires and plans and goals for engaging with students, staff, and community. So thank you very much for this discussion. It is very helpful, and I look forward to supporting the changes and the work. If there's no closing comments, I want to make sure that everybody's had an opportunity to share everything about the communications plan. I'll transition to our Equity Council conversation. Okay. Just need a moment, please, to transfer documents. So make sure I have.
We'll take that moment. Thank you. So while you're doing that, I'll take a
Yes,
point of
please.
order just to remind that President Daniels was excused for this evening's meeting, and I did not get a chance to mention that when we opened. Just wanted to make sure that was clear for the record. Thank you.
Okay. Well, one of the other hats I have, I'm so fortunate to wear in my role here in the district is co-facilitator of the Equity Council. And leading this council with Dr. Watts is one of the highlights of my work here in the district. And this evening, I'm very excited to present an annual presentation that was impacted last year also by COVID, but we're very excited to bring back to you this tonight to present our annual updates, our recommendations for the 1801 Race and Equity Policy and Procedure updates from the Equity Council on behalf of the Equity Council. So we do have, I see at least one, two, at least a couple Equity Council members, a few Equity Council members actually on the call with us, and a few more that will hopefully be joining us this evening to be able to talk and answer any questions you might have, talk through some of the changes that that are being presented this evening. A few things I want to share about our Equity Council, who we are, and who has presented these changes before you tonight. We have 73 volunteer members, including parents, community members, alumni, and staff. Our members of the Equity Council have been meeting monthly for a total of more than 16 hours of planned meetings. Now, this does not count include at all the countless hours of review, the emails, the reading, the support, the one-on-one meetings, the small group meetings, and all the time that they've invested on their own through volunteer work to support everything that we've been doing this year. As you know, through updates and through information on our website, we've had 4 goals that we identified last July, and we've met as of this evening by presenting the update to policy and procedure, all 4 goals this year. So we expanded our Equity Council to the tune of a 220% increase. We executed the first of its kind student equity survey for grades 6 through 12, with nearly 5,000, but over 4,700 students who chose to respond to this optional survey the first time we sent it out. And we developed a KSD equity audit tool for our KSD leaders to use while they're completing their budget for the next fiscal year. And right now that's being piloted by a number of school and district leaders. And tonight we bring you the updated policy and procedure. So a few key points before we get into discussion about the changes presented for for policy 1801 is that we recognize the recommended changes range. They're both technical and adaptive. We, as an Equity Council, did review the policy line by line together as a group. Some of it was done together in person. Some of it was recommendations through Teams and email. And the key areas of change that are recommended are really aligning the policy to the district's strategic work around diversity, equity, and inclusion, including a targeted universalist approach. And we also wanted to be clear about how we are aligning and clarifying policy language, really clearly delineating between the what and the how, and being clear about accountability for all Team KSD members as we continue to progress forward in our equity journey. So I am going to stop sharing the PowerPoint, and I can pull up the policy if that is helpful, but wanted to open it up for discussion about any questions you have about the recommended policy changes from Equity Council.
I have a couple questions slash feedback.
Mhm.
I really appreciate this, and I want to thank the Equity Council for their work on this, and thank you for co-facilitating. I was curious about a couple of things. I was noticing that in this document, nowhere does it really discuss like an intersectional lens when looking at equity work. The document says equity, but the specific policy and procedure is race and equity. So there's a couple of things I think it's important when we're talking about race and equity is talking about things from an intersectional lens. And I think that's missing. And I think that's very important when talking about equity work is making sure that we are looking from a intersectional lens, because we know that not all communities are the same. It's different depending on your gender, your income, your sexual orientation. All that really affects what your role in society and like what happens. And I think it's really important that we talk about the importance of intersectionality. And I don't know if that was discussed. I see a section where it talks about regardless of race, ethnicity, learning difference, which kind of alludes to that. I think it's important to spell it out. Another question slash feedback is where you talk about race and equity, purpose and background, and you call out white students have clearly outperformed Black, Hispanic, Native. And I'm just curious about the language in using that. I know that different communities do use different language. Not everyone uses Black, not everyone uses Hispanic, not everyone uses Native American. They might use Indigenous or First Peoples. So I think it's important that like in the language that we use, and I know you had a group of people looking at this and I'm just another person, but I think it's really important that when we are calling groups of people into a document, that we're inclusive in the language we use to describe the cross sections of the people that we want to support in this policy. So those are the two things that when I read this over ahead of time that really stood out to me that I think that we need to look at a little bit more in depth and possibly added the bit on intersectionality. That was my first thing that I saw. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Beno. I do want to respond and say that we have had that conversation and recognize that as an area of growth for us as a council and a district for learning and opportunity to grow. I think that when it comes to the supporting our LGBTQ plus students and staff, in general, it is an area of growth, and we've identified that as a council as we have work to do. And so I think that is why you see it show up in the language. And while that's not the only place where intersectionality shows up, it is definitely an area where we have seen that. And so I think while I want to also honor the work of the Equity Council, this is a journey. And so I appreciate that this is one policy and procedure, one of many policy and procedures, but one of the few that the board has committed to reviewing annually. And that is such a key statement about the values of our district and our board. And so I appreciate that we don't have to get this perfect, but we can continue to address it. And so I will take these comments back and we can continue to look at this and continue to look at our work as well.
Yes, I have several comments as well. I appreciate Director Beno's comments on being consistent in the language too. And with regards to intersectionality, one of the things that sort of stuck out for me, I'm having this discussion with WASDA group. We have a Board of Color group talking about some changes happening, and the race and equity policy, we've got something like 35 school districts in the state that have them. And it's interesting how they call it very different names. You know, it could be equity leadership, or they don't always point to race and equity. You know, it could be diversity and equity. And there are also non-discrimination and equity policies. So I remember a conversation we had when we began this endeavor, and it was strictly about the fact that we don't call this discrimination policy, or we make sure that there are areas that are covered, and this is strictly addressing race. I remember it was just a very strong point that our consultant also made, that this, the name change of making sure that race and equity are called out. And so that we don't lump it into non-discriminatory behavior only. And so I wonder about that, how that would affect language, when it comes to intersectionality. And, I think it's a good discussion for us to have. This was many years ago. We had this discussion with a consultant, but as a board, it might be a really good conversation. And then secondly, I think, you mentioned a couple of main changes there, but I also noticed that the perspectives of our families and students were also highlighted in this version. So I compared the previous to this, and I feel like a lot of that came from our discussion with the South King County Discipline Coalition. And so I really appreciated some of this verbiage about perspectives of our diverse student body, adding that in. And also there was an area that said incorporate student voice as a critical part of school and district decision making. So that was a really good addition. I saw a portion of it on the procedure end, but I like that it's coming into the policy itself. The only thing on that particular statement I was thinking about was when the students were talking about harassment, intimidation, and bullying. It's great that they're part of the decision making, but I would also like it to read something about it gauging, welcoming environment for all by the students. So incorporating student voice as a critical part of school and district decision making, and engaging a welcoming environment for all. So we're actually, I like that you're doing the student survey, and that is a result of us stating in the policy that we are going to have our students gauge what is a welcoming environment for them. Okay, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Director Venkatasalam. I do think that you're seeing a lot of changes based on the listening sessions, absolutely. But I also want to honor and lift up the fact that, this year we had educators join our Equity Council, which is where you saw the growth. And so we cannot underestimate the power of teacher voice. And so you are seeing classroom and school-based voice reflected in the changes that you are being presented this evening. And I just want to honor that as well.
Sure. And also, I think, I did want to ask about the racial equity analysis tool. I know that you're piloting something, but I did read in a couple of I think one school, Mill Creek, I'm not sure, of embracing of equity, or what type of survey or tool that they're using. Are we doing something just school by school, or is it a district initiative?
So there's two tools that our schools and programs have access to. So we have the 5 key questions that we've had for some time as far as a tool to interrogate decisions or programs or things that may be before us as far as moving in a direction and making a decision. So that's the bookmark that you all have access to and that you were given as far as the 5 key questions. The audit tool that's being piloted is a new tool that's a different option, and that is going to be implemented district-wide. But it is, there's 4 different components, and it's a teacher level, a classroom level, a school level, tool and then a district or program level tool. And that's really about how we make decisions to allocate resources, whether it's time or money or human resources, to ensure that it's being distributed equitably. And also there's a multiple components, and we used a couple different resources to create that, modify it, and make it suitable for Kent. For our context. And so both tools are district-wide tools.
Okay, thank you.
However, I do want to say it does not mean that there's not a different tool, that schools also have their own building dollars that they can use for consultants. So I don't want to misspeak it. It might be something different they could be using specifically, and I could look into that, but we do have two different district-wide tools. And I agree about the race and equity is specific to our title of our policy. I've seen racial equity, which is specific, but ours is race and equity policy. So if the board were to change that, I think it would impact the work, all of the words within the policy. It can change the meaning of the policy, as you stated. So that was the other question or statement you posed. Thank you.
Yeah, I know last year we didn't get the opportunity to update this because of COVID. So I'm excited to see a 220% growth in the committee, and I'm excited to see this coming before us. I just appreciate all the hard work and the time that everyone has put into this on the committee to bring it to us.
And I'm just going to piggyback. I think the changes that were made, I was impressed with the changes that were made. It's listening to our community, and some that had some particular issues. It also, I also think it's going to aid in tying all this together with some of the equity work that we want to be doing going forward with Kingmakers and Mr. Breakfast and all that. All of that ties together, and it's a nice package. So thank you.
Thank you both. If there are no other comments or changes on the policy, we can take a look at the procedure. Trying to give appropriate wait time. Okay. Similar to I'm not going to bring back up my PowerPoint because I want to make sure I can get into the procedure if that's helpful for me to bring up. Similar to the policy though, we again, both technical and adaptive changes, we spent an entire meeting as a council, as well as additional work time to go through line by line on the procedure. And I would say, this was quite the discussion because this is really directive of our work as staff members. And there was a lot of discussion as well and community input from our community members, but really aligning the procedure again to our strategic work, thinking about the targeted universalist approach, focusing on students, on holding adults accountable, and really ensuring also that our procedure is actionable. And so in-depth discussions about, well, what does it mean to measure? How are we going to know? What does progress actually mean? What does that look like? Who is responsible? What does this look like in the classroom? What does it look like in the boardroom? What does it look like at the district office? And so really rich discussions from the Equity Council members that participated in this. And again, just clarifying, does this belong in procedure or does this belong in policy? Is it a what? Is it a how? And so that is why you see changes again. One, because it was a year overdue, and two, because we really spent time as a committee, a larger committee, going through it line by line. So happy to take any questions that you have about procedure 1801.
I'm
I
glad.
have a
to see-
couple.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just want to say again, incorporating student voice, number 5. So, I mean, that pops out to me. That's hugely important. And so I'm glad, again, I'm just glad to see it's included. This, it looks like there was massive work done on the procedure. Oh, and I just appreciate all the hard work. It was a massive, it looks like massive amount of changes. So I appreciate that.
I was kind of curious why it seemed like they crossed out or added, forgive me, I don't have that in front of me. I don't have dual screens and I can't go back and forth. I'm technically challenged on all that. And I forgot to put the copy in front of me, but basically, whoa, where are you going? You're leaving me.
Oh, I shared the screen. I don't know if that's helpful.
Yeah, it goes off and I have to go back in.
Oh, okay, sorry.
I go in no man's land and there I go again. But I found it enlightening to understand that they put in celebrate. And I was curious, did we have any real in-depth discussion of what celebrate meant? Our wins kind of in this? Or was there any discussion at the council on that, what they meant by that?
Celebrate.
You know, if we're making progress or
Oh.
showing special stuff. You know.
So that that actually wasn't a change. That was in procedure prior to, and we didn't touch that one. So we have worked. We changed that the year prior, so in 2018. I think that in order to, we need to ensure that our students and staff of color are seen. And we can't make be welcome or feel welcome or know that we're heard if we're not seen and celebrated. And so that actually ties a lot to our previous conversation this evening about communications plan. And so an example of this work is really, one would be our most recent issue of Connected that went out to homes, where you see our students and you see the work that we're doing, and you see our children. And when we talk about our work with our partners, as well as celebrating our gains and our graduation rates. And so we've also done work around celebrating specific celebrations for different heritage months. But this is not about just doing that. And I think Director Benno said it's not chequity work, right? That's not enough. That's not what this is. But it's truly celebrating gains and celebrating our students specifically, because that's one way we can make sure that they feel seen and heard. So I don't, any of my colleagues from Equity Council that recall any specific conversations around celebration, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know that we talked about that.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciated the newsletter or the connections that came out. The young child on the cover was so delightful. But I'm wondering, I was in a very heated meeting, political meeting, and a person brought up that we don't have all the stuff in our equity and an equity plan. And I said, well, we do have. And he basically was talking from no real actual knowledge. But I'm wondering if getting this out more clearly to the community, that we do have all these equity plans, equity and racism policy and procedure, that maybe it needs to be a little bit more celebrated that we are doing that itself. Because even people who seem to think they're very knowledgeable in our community are standing up and saying we don't even have this. And I pointed out that wasn't correct. But that was not well received because he thought he knew what he was talking about. He didn't anyway. So I'm just wondering if we don't need to perhaps, you know, have more of a celebration that we're actually doing the written work too. I don't know, somehow. It's just a thought.
Yeah, I kind of go to Director Hamada's point is kind of, it struck me that number 9 in the procedure talks about ensuring communication tools and languages are utilized by all district programs and schools to engage families and community and hold all KSD staff accountable. So speaking of which, the surveys, the student surveys, you know, a lot of questions on that, like who are the 4,000 students that responded? Are they students of color? You know, what were they facing? That was important for the board to know, community to know. And then just including that particular section, I know we say engage families, but we really should be talking about you know, our students too, what it is that they're facing. So we're using communication tools to gauge the welcoming environment. And I go back to the HIB, the harassment, intimidation, bullying. How do we know? We're not going to get that information from the families necessarily or community. We're going to hear from the students. So I really feel like we need to strengthen those sort of opportunities to hear from our students. Even though we say student voice, that could be decision making, but are we hearing from them about their environment, you know, what it is that they're facing on the daily? So just a thought on that. We could strengthen that. I'm reading through all of those bullet points and I'm not really feeling in the procedure that there's strong language about student collection of data when it comes to a welcoming environment for students.
I think one of the things with the language around student voice is where we walk the line, like the survey data, is when we collected that information. For example, when we published it, it was optional for students to self-identify their race as it was for their gender. And so there were a number of students who chose not to identify, as well as their grade or their school. So every identifier question was optional. So we had some information about who responded of the 4,700 students, but because we made it optional, as were just beginning to launch the survey and building trust with our students to respond to this type of survey, we did not want to make it a requirement. And that was one way to gain and build trust. We are also expanding our listening sessions, and that's one way we feel that will ensure. So just as we've modeled with our adults, and we will model with the Equity Council, we are also going to be doing listening sessions specifically with students, and more specifically with students of color. And so that is another way we can continue to build trust and gain trust and get information about welcoming environments based on some of those questions that we asked, like about a welcoming school environment that were asked in the student survey. So while the action items and the tactics may not be called out in procedure, the overall goals in the procedure, I think the intention was to call them out here. But I've made a note, Director Venkatasalam, about that, specifically around number 9 and number 5. Was it number 5, the student voice?
Mm-hmm.
As well as your policy comment that carries over here for number 5 as well.
I have a question slash comment feedback.
Mhm.
I know that multiple departments are trying to make equity work happen. And I see in the procedure, like the district will do a lot of things. And I'm curious if there's been discussion. And I know Seattle is a big school district. I mean, we're the fifth largest. So, but I know they have a racial equity department that ensures that all the departments are making sure that they're following equity procedures, equity checklists to ensuring that equity is occurring. So I'm curious if there's any discussions of like reorganizing departments or something to actually have a department of racial equity or something to ensure that the work is happening. That way one group ensures that it's going on instead of, and I know people are busy, there may not be a focus, even though like it should be, but it's people are doing their daily job and may not necessarily look at it from like a lens of equity. So I'm wondering if there's been thoughts or conversations about doing that. And I know that's funds and that's money and whatever, but I think that would be like a bold move to equity. It would be an action item and that we could occur, that could be included in this. I don't see it on here, but I'm curious if that's conversation for later or if that's even been discussed.
Yes.
So Director Benno, I'll let Melissa tell the entire story, but it sounds like you were actually in the meeting. Are you sure you weren't there when we were discussing?
I'm pretty sure.
All right. Well, Melissa, please share the news and the progress we're making.
Yeah, well, Director Benno, we still have half an hour to go, and recommendations is our next section on our PowerPoint. So may I kindly say stay tuned? Is that respectful? Or, but yes, you are absolutely right. I will also add that equity work is everyone's work. And when we do this well, everyone should be acting with that lens in mind. And we do know that this is like a muscle and like training, that this is going to take time. And some people are better equipped and have been lifting this weight for a while, and others are just starting to lift this weight. And so the muscles are developed differently for everyone in KSD. And so the work has to be adapted for everyone, and we need to meet people where they are. And that is part of our charge and challenge. And we welcome that opportunity, but we do need focus on this work, and we do need to keep it top of mind, each of us. And that is how we serve our students and our staff. And so, yes, thank you. And we will get an opportunity to talk about this in just a few moments. I can transition if there's no other procedure comments, but I want to make sure I've heard from everyone about any other procedure comments.
I do have one more question.
Sure.
Under where I think it's 14, the new 14. I get confused about the numbers. I'm looking at the track changes one about the Equity Council. I feel like there's the comment above it. Is that like a subheading? And that like I'm kind of confused by that. But then also like if we're going to have an Equity Council, does something need to be action steps? Like this is what the Equity Council is going to do besides supporting implementing policy. Like are they going to have specific action items there too? That was my other question.
Yes, thank you. I noticed there was a little off formatting. If you look in the no check changes, it's a little easier to read. And so apologies for that. I think we were just trying to make it a little more easier to read, and one return got missed there. But we do have specific language around what the Equity Council does and is supposed to do separately that's much more detailed and defined than here in this procedure. However, we did not want it to be lost that an Equity Council needs to be in place. We do feel that that's important and should stand the test of time, that regardless of when this is, that this should be in procedure, and that's important work. But that can change, and probably the details of the council may not need to be in there.
Yeah, there's one thing I did, I'm sorry to go back to the policy. One thing I noticed also that that first two paragraphs, we talk about achievement and opportunity gaps and institutional bias. And then in the second paragraph, we talk about discrimination that's led to institutional, structural, and individual bias inconsistent. So in keeping with what Director Veno said about the demographics and being consistent, how we label and, what are we trying to say? I know we talk about our mission down at the bottom as well, but then are we talking about just institutional bias, or are we talking about all biases? I noticed we struck bias, anti-bias somewhere, and we put anti-racist. Did I miss that somewhere? It feels like, it's not consistent, the messaging throughout the document, but it's just one of those things that stick out. Making sure, we, like in our agreements, we say, we are going to ensure educational equity and achieve our mission of successfully preparing all students for their, says future, but futures. But are we then not going to talk about our core values there as well? So I just had a thought about that.
Okay. So in that second sentence, Director Venkatachalam, would it be your suggestion? What I'm hearing is to call out perhaps to policies and procedures will identify and correct practices and policies that perpetuate both the achievement and opportunity gaps and institutional bias or institutional racism. Is that what I hear you questioning? Because we do call out anti-racism later.
Yeah, we call out anti-racism, but then we talk about institutional, structural, and individual bias in the next paragraph.
Yeah. So just consistency.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
The individual bias is a huge thing, right? And so when we cross out anti-bias and we're saying anti-racism, there's also a question of, are we going to look at implicit bias and those kinds of things? So then we get into the definitions. And that's where it gets confusing, because I think the definitions are below, but they're not really equating to what is up on top. I don't know if that makes sense.
In the definitions, we have anti-bias and
we have implicit bias.
And institutional racism.
There's no structural racism there.
Okay.
Just, keeping it consistent.
Okay.
That's all I had. Thank you.
Okay. Any further comments before I share the additional recommendations from Equity Council? Okay.
Thank you for all their work. This is not an easy job. God knows.
Yes, thank you. So the Equity Council have, and throughout this year, actually, not just when we looked at policy, but throughout the year, has talked really about what it is that we feel would be important to continue and further along our work in the district, and has 3 main recommendations for the board to consider. A couple of these you will recognize have been brought to the board previously. One is to move the KSD race and equity policy and procedure to the 0,000 series. This would signify, we believe, that if this was moved as a core value of the district, if this was moved to the 0,000 strategic planning series as a 0,000 series policy, then it would signify to the district, to the public, that this is core. It's a core belief, and it would serve as foundational to this district strategic plan, and residing in that 0,000 series, which currently doesn't exist, would really be a way to publicly state just how foundational this is for every KSD employee and all the work that we do. Particularly this year, as we move into a strategic planning year, we feel that the timing would be really right for this move. Number 2, we recommend that an Office of Equity be created to be the lead for the district's collaborative work. And particularly that this office could lead in the areas of race and equity, policy and procedure, implementation, and review, as well as culturally responsive student and family engagement, and culturally responsive professional learning. If the board recognizes that these are really long-term and short-term goals that require significant work and equitable resource allocation to meet the needs of each student, then the Equity Council recommends that the district's annual budget should reflect this core value and support an office to support this work district-wide. And this would include a director level position, program support staff, probably, and an MSOC budget, I will say. And that this should live in the superintendent's community is what we discussed, because it touches every single community, and it really needs to be a position, a community, a team that reports directly to the superintendent, because this is core to our foundational to our work as a district. And finally, the third recommendation is to continue with this targeted universalist approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion to support all Black, Indigenous, and students of color. Because if we know and believe that structural inequity produces consistently different outcomes for different communities, then we, the Equity Council, recommend that our district's approach has to be different and must consistently be that of an opportunity structure, and one that specifically identifies and uplifts those students who are least well served. And we can do that by providing the necessary resources and multiple paths needed for different individuals and communities. And that is those are our recommendations on how we can continue this path, and continue our journey in diversity, equity, and inclusion work. We know we have work to do, and the Equity Council looks forward to continuing to support this work. And that is our presentation for this year's recommendations and updates to the 1801 policy and procedure. Recognizing the time, we do have a little bit of time for discussion. We do have a few Equity Council members who are here. If the board has any questions about the recommendations or additional comments, that is the end of our presentation tonight.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
I had one question.
Questions from the board?
Yes, I thank you, the Equity Council. I know some members came a year and a half ago, and there were some of these recommendations, and they fervently believed in the Office of Equity and having a director report directly under the superintendent, Dr. Watts. And I firmly believe we do need someone to keep us informed and gauge when we talk about welcoming environment and anti-bias. All of those things need attention to the point where these are not just mere words, but we're also following this to the word and acting accordingly. My question was related to some of the recommendations, well, the third recommendations too, regarding targeted universalism. And I wondered if there were any discussions about what that might look like, those strategic practices beyond kingmakers. Were there any discussions about specific trainings or specific needs that came from the student surveys that could be planned in our upcoming budget discussions?
Absolutely. Thank you, Director Venkatasalam. So when we adopt a targeted universalist approach, while Kingmakers has been and continues to be a wonderful partner in this work, the Equity Council brought this a couple of years ago and has been operating under this model, and really what it is, and we have some trainings from Kingmakers for all of KSD leadership and Equity Council that we'll be going through on what this really means and what it doesn't mean. And really it's a way to look at our students' needs and understanding that if we can identify and look at our data, which we are very fortunate to have our DARTS team to help us understand and look at data. And present our data in a way that is understandable. And we've been doing that work for a few years now. But if we can look at that data and understand it and then identify which students have the greatest needs, and sometimes when we look at that data, it may be that it is, Black students, Black male students, Black male inclusive ed students that are of the greatest need, in the greatest need of support, or the least well served. That if we focus our practices, our instructional practices and support services on lifting those students up first, then all students will see increases in achievement. If we understand that approach, it doesn't mean that this is just about serving one group of students or population. It's a way to look at the data, because sometimes when you look at the data, it might say, you know what, this year when we look at the data, Native American female students are the least well-served students. And we need to look at, female Native American students in grades 7 and 8 in math. And so understanding, it's a way to look at serving students. And it's a model that's used in healthcare. It's a model that's used in different arenas. So the approach is really about how we serve students. It's not necessarily about one population or another. And so understanding the model, you're right, is one way, but it's something that we have been talking about for a couple of years. But it's not been something that we've trained everyone broadly on at this point.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand operationally, how can we support as a board, during the budgetary discussions? What can we do to support our students and your findings?
Right. Well, so I know that the board has the opportunity to submit their
Yeah,
their
ideas.
Their priorities. Thank you. I was searching for that word. Priorities. I think the prioritizing the Office of Equity could be one way, but I think prioritizing the programs and supports of student needs, because that comes in different forms at the district level and at the student level, and has different funding sources. But it isn't necessarily defined, you're correct, at this moment of, this X contract, XYZ contracts, if that's what you're asking.
I think myself, I'm struggling with understanding specifics on this. And I'm kind of a specific person. So getting some direction financially on what would actually we could accomplish with going into certain programmings. And I think it needs to be specific, because people in the schools, the people running the programs, the people looking at the data have a better idea of where exactly we could target this funding. And I'm assuming we're going to, and I should never assume anything, but I'm assuming that we're going to know some numbers from someone, how much it would cost to add an equity director in programming. And I'm wondering also if a lot of the programs that we have now fall into that and are covered under different budget items. And would we be just reiterating, putting more money into it that's already there? I mean, it would help me to understand where all this money is going already and what additional would be needed if we want to support these programs, because I think they're important, but I need to know specifics, and I don't feel I have a handle on that. And maybe that's just me, but I don't feel I have a direct handle on what I need to ask for or what I need to support specifically.
Thank you, Director Mata. The Office of Equity ask and the Director ask, those are new positions.
Right.
So the costing would be based on salary plus benefits of the level of those positions that they would be placed at for those individuals. So we can get an estimate of those. It is budget season right now, so we are looking at those, but we would walk through that process as far as adding a position for as what the cost is for a new position.
No, I can see that could be easily identifiable, but I'm just talking about other programmings and what we've accomplished with what we have now and what more we could accomplish if more funding were put in those areas. And again, I think also, I look at this in a bigger picture, is we want to bring our community along with us too. That they have to be behind. I mean, we can have policies and we can have procedures and all that, but we want to bring them along too, that why we're doing this is to benefit the entire community. The entire community will benefit. And I mean, just looking at social media tonight on one particular site, we have a long ways to go on that. So.
I have a couple. Oh.
Go ahead, Director.
I have a couple of thoughts, and I agree with Director Venkatasalam about programming. I also want to push a little bit. When I used to work at Walmart, I used to have a manager that used to say, one person called. So that means 200 people would have called if one person called. And I was like, well, one person called. And I'm making that comparison because different students have different needs, and having one program will benefit one group of students, which is great. But I don't know if we can definitely correlate and say that's going to help all students. Like, I would be very cautious that certain programs are designed for certain groups of students while others may benefit from it. Like, I think looking at other programs to help students, I think would be important. I'm always about making sure that there's funding for student and student programming. So I'm going to push on that a little bit. Like, we can disagree, but I'm going to push on that a little bit. The other thing I want you to kind of push you in a positive way is for the Equity Council, and I appreciate the work that you do, is making sure that focusing and doing a little bit more work on the LGBTQ community, immigrant and refugee students as well. There's a lot of communities that are underserved. I think it's important that we need to look at what communities are being underserved and make sure that their voice is included in conversations of equity and equity council, and just to make sure that I know you said it, but I just want to make sure that's absolutely clear that like we can have a list of 75 groups of people, and I would be cool with that because different groups have different needs. And just looking at what types of programming are available and what we can offer through some of our programs or union programs or community partners that could do some of that programming for low or no cost. So just keeping an open mind about what kind of work we can do, what kind of partnerships we can make. And we have one great program. We can have several others, I think. And I think that's fine. I know like at some point we have to worry about budget, but for me, students, student programs, student opportunities will always be at the top of my priorities, and supporting educators in their offices and classrooms as well. So those are just kind of two things I wanted to put out there.
Yes, wonderful. Thank you. And I want to just reiterate to be clear from the Equity Council's perspective, the 3 asks were about the change to policy, moving the policy to 0,000 series, the Office of Equity, and then, an approach, which is how, one of the foundations of our work, and how we a lens through which we've been doing our work for the past couple of years. One of the lenses that we've used and is foundational to the changes that we brought before you tonight, but not a specific recommendation for any specific program. So I keep hearing programming, and I just want to be clear that the programming aspect, we didn't bring forth any programming specifically tonight from the Equity Council, because you're right, we have refugee support, we have a number of other supports throughout the district, and we do have staff that support that, working with our council. And so I want to make sure to be clear that we're not advocating for one of our teams or groups over another or program over another. That was not the intent of our council at all.
For sure. I just want to make the comment out there that
Absolutely.
like if we're going to do programming that, but yes, I agree. Like the recommendations didn't include that. I just was putting that out into the universe because I want that to be out there in the universe.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's good that Director Benner brought that up, because I feel like, the policy itself, the procedure talks about developing an action plan. And I would think that would come before, the recommendations, or it could work in alignment with the recommendations, but you must have some thoughts on the action plans. And I think that would help us too with the budgeting issues.
Yeah, so our KSD leadership last year was working right up until we had to close school buildings per the governor on action plans for 3 key levers that we believe will drive this work forward on creating welcoming schools and environments, disrupting the disproportionality we see in discipline, and creating access to rigorous coursework for all students. And all 3 of those leadership groups, which includes all school building leaders and central office leaders, all 3 of them included in their recommendation creating an Office of Equity. And so that while that work was interrupted by the pandemic, we don't feel it is premature to include the recommendation for an equity office, and why we wanted to include that work from the action plans in procedure, so that work continues even post pandemic.
Yeah, and I'm very clear on 1 and 2, and I don't see any objections there at all. I think it's the 3rd one that I'm struggling with. I'm not really understanding the plan there.
Sure.
I understand it's not programs, and I understand the concept of targeted universalism, but how we embrace it through our policy. So I'm not really clear of the ask to the board, I guess.
I appreciate the feedback and can definitely share that with the rest of council. And again, it was just a recommendation. And so I again want to just thank the board for prioritizing this work and making time in the schedule annually to hear from the Equity Council. We recognize that the schedule is limited for the board and appreciate making this time. And thank you again to the Equity Council who's put in the time and effort. And we look forward to coming back again next year. I'll make sure that the changes that come before you on the second reading are incorporated that I heard this evening after working with the Equity Council, and look forward also to continuing the work on the communications plan. So thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you, everyone.
No, thank you.
Yeah. And with that, it was a very full meeting. And I thank all of you that attended that didn't get a chance to speak. Thank you for being here. So with that, it is 7:30 and we will call this meeting to a close. Have a great night, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.
Bye.